there is an ethnic hierarchy in Britain. Now, I am very confident in saying that white Brits are at the very bottom.
Thomas Sowell in Australia. Obviously, one of the things that he's kind of famous for, holding banners like "White Man Fight Back." If a group was to do the exact same thing in the UK, what do you think would happen?
I believe that Britain is becoming more and more draconian. Terrorism was something like the Lockerbie bombing. Now, terrorism is putting stickers on a lamppost.
Men will typically always go more conservatively, women will always go a bit more liberal. The divide is only getting bigger and bigger. How do you feel about the woman question? The narrative has just gone so bad, quintupled its budget, 730 million. What do you think of the current sentiment of Israel worldwide right now? Very quick message before we begin. Something that I've been asked for quite a while now is, what do we do moving forward? The reality is we do need to start somewhere, which is why I've started to build my very own community. If you've been watching and the content's been resonating with yourself, please join the new locals. It's completely free for the first 200 members, and if you haven't already, please follow the Spotify, please follow the Rumble. All my links are in the description below. Anyways, it's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Okay, Mark, again, thanks very much for the second interview. It's great to see you again.
Well, thank you for having me on. I've got to say, I really enjoyed the first time I was on with you, and I felt it was one of the best interviews I've ever participated in. And the feedback I've got has been incredible, and even more incredible were the small clips you managed to pull from it that were just sort of 5-10 minutes long. Some of them went viral, and the people who have seen them really enjoyed those more digestible takes, because I know when you see sort of a 2-hour interview on YouTube, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but being able to condense some of the deeper points we discussed into digestible sound bites, I think that worked really well. So thank you for the first interview, and I'm very happy to be back today.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, and you shined a light on so many topics which I wasn't wise to, and I think like I could see it in the comments too, that loads of people were kind of getting their minds blown a little bit. But you know, and I gotta say too, every now and then I talk to someone, and the response I get with the comments and the messages, it genuinely feels like this person could start a cult. And like, I can tell you, you were the most heavily requested person to come back on. So yeah, again, thanks.
Not a problem. And I'm really looking forward to this, because since we've spoken, so many things have happened. And a lot of what's happened has kind of vindicated my positions and probably made people think a little bit more deeply about the things we talked about in the first interview. And also, you know, just for the record, we happen to be talking today on Wednesday, the 6th of May, which is the day before the local elections take place in England. And these elections are particularly exciting because we're seeing the rise of reform as the populist right movement. But equally, we're seeing the rise of Zach Polanski's Green Party, which is essentially providing an alternative. I thought it was going to be Corbyn's Your Party at one point that was going to rise and take that position. But it actually seems to be Polanski's Green Party, which is rising and providing an alternative, not just for white people who are on the sort of far liberal left, but also for ethnic minority communities who don't feel able to vote Labour anymore because of Labour's blatant toadying to Israel and Zionist interests here in the UK.
Yeah, and you don't see Restore being a particular threat at the moment then?
Well, Restore aren't actually standing a single candidate. They've said they need more time to vet their members to see who should stand. And that's a bold claim to make. I was part of the BNP for 10 years, and vetting candidates is, I would say, a little bit of a luxury. And that might sound like a strange thing to say, but when you have 5,013 seats up for grabs, which is the total number of council seats up for election tomorrow, you want to put on a good showing. And I think the most number of seats the BNP stood at a council election might have been about 500 or 600. So just over sort of probably about 10-15% of the total, which would have been up for grabs at the time, which is good for a small party. But when you look at what Reform are standing tomorrow, 4,812. That's incredible. And to put that into perspective, I think the Conservatives are only standing 4,777 seats. So Reform are actually standing in more seats than the Conservative Party, which is the oldest and most established party in the UK. So it's quite incredible to see what they have done. And I think, Rupert Lowe, he has two parties. He has Great Yarmouth First. They are standing in Great Yarmouth. But he hasn't chose to put candidates forward yet for Restore. But Reform have done extremely well to get that number of candidates together on the ballot. And if things go the way the media have predicted and the way many pundits have predicted, we could see an absolute bloodbath for the two main parties. You will likely, if things go the way people have predicted, see both Labour and the Tories as the big losers and the big winners being Reform and the Greens, which is extremely interesting because if that happens, that's something I predicted, because I've long talked about the polarisation of British politics, about people moving away from the centre ground towards what are relative extremes, or taking a step towards relative extremes. I'm not saying Reform's an extremist party. I mean, the Greens are probably more extreme. But it is interesting to see that polarisation. And it's something I actually welcome, because it basically heralds a little bit of a new dawn. Because if those two main parties go and we level the political playing field, I think British politics will be more unstable, more able to change, and more likely to elect, or it'll be more likely for radical candidates to be elected for relatively small unknown parties, which allows new voices and harder lines to be heard in Parliament.
Yeah, no, this is it. I mean, like you say, Labour and Conservatives have just been in power for so long that it seemed like nothing was changing and they were never going to get voted out. It's now we're seeing all the cracks in society and it's just unavoidable. So, yeah, the whole country needs change, but like you say, it's extreme on both sides. And with that, nationalism is very much on the rise right now.
Well, I would say nationalism. Look, I'm not saying things are bad, but I'm not saying things are exactly where we want them. Reform, although it can play an important role in terms of destroying the Conservative Party, destroying the Conservative Party is an absolute necessity if we want to see proper nationalism. And I want to make this very clear. When I speak in sort of kind terms about Reform, I am not speaking about Reform in kind terms as a party that is the be all and end all, that is my end goal as a ruling party. I would want something far more radical and far more revolutionary to take hold in Britain. However, for something like that to come along, we need the political field to be completely levelled. And I see Reform as a little bit of a wrecking ball that will essentially destroy the Conservative Party completely, which is something that needs to happen, as the Conservative Party have always been this massive blockade to nationalist parties getting elected. If you look at 1979, the National Front became the fourth largest party. They weren't particularly predicted to gain a lot of seats, if any, but they were initially predicted to maybe take 10%, 11, 12%, maybe up to around 15% of the vote nationally. But Margaret Thatcher cleverly and rather disingenuously adopted their policies almost on the eve of the election, giving fiery speeches about understanding people's concerns, about swamping levels of immigration. And she took the wind out of their sails. The National Front got disastrous results. I don't think they saved a single deposit nationally, despite standing a record number of seats. And unfortunately, that led to the party's demise. And the Conservative Party has a long history of doing this. Thatcher did it in 79. David Cameron did it in 2010, famous speech about reducing migration down to the tens of thousands rather than the hundreds of thousands. Theresa May repeated those claims. She was going to get immigration down to the tens of thousands. Boris Johnson, a robust Australian-style points-based immigration system where we choose who comes to Britain, and people lap it up every time, to the detriment of genuine anti-immigration parties. So for me, and for many veteran nationalists, seeing the Conservative Party completely smashed to smithereens, done away with, is something massive, and it's something long overdue. And the reason it's so important is because the Conservatives make up half of that two-party oligarchy, and people have these huge biases towards Conservative and Labour. There are these generational voting patterns where some people treat those parties as if they're football teams. So, you go to the footy with your dad, you watch, West Ham play every weekend with your dad when you're a kid, and you'll support West Ham till you die, and you want your son to support West Ham. Well, that's a football team. But the issue is, we're not talking about football teams here. We are talking about politics, and politics is very different to a football team. You shouldn't just support a political party forever, as if they're the people that are on your side. They're the people that your dad voted for. They're the people your granddad voted for. So whatever they do from here on in doesn't matter. You'll always support them. It doesn't work that way. But that's how people act. So for the Tories to be destroyed would be brilliant. And it would see that major party gone, finished. But also, what you'll have with the rise of reform is many white working class red wall areas will also go to reform, and that will smash Labour too. So I see this not as an end. I don't see reform as an end, but I see them more of a means to an end, as a party that will take us towards a new era where people are willing, and in some cases they have to, vote outside of the established political norm, which is, do you vote red, do you vote blue? You vote blue to get rid of red, you vote red to get rid of blue, and the cycle continues infinitely until we're a minority. By getting rid of red and blue and opening things up, you will have something that we've never had before. And as a young man, I was actually quite naive, and I remember putting out BNP leaflets, and I was so impressed by the message on these leaflets that I thought, when these drop through the letterbox onto the doormat and they explain to people that we're going to become a minority, people are going to vote BNP and that's going to be it. Everyone that reads this is going to understand the problem, and we're going to get out of this. And that was obvious complete naivety, but I was only like 20 at that time, so I thought it was a simple fix to a complex problem. And as you grow older, you realize that the problem is so complex there's no simple fix. But I think if you remove the main parties and you start again from fresh, Reform aren't going to have the infrastructure that the Tories had, so they're not going to have that sort of almost like Svengali hold over the electorate like the Tories or Labour have had. So people will naturally be more willing to vote for different things. And that will hopefully mean people are more willing to pick up a leaflet or to have a look at someone's website or their social media feed and say, what do they actually believe? Who should I vote for? Is this a good point? And the other thing I'm hoping for with Reform, and this is slightly more nuanced, is Reform obviously gave us Rupert Lowe, and some people now think Rupert Lowe is the be-all and end-all, but Rupert Lowe didn't get elected under his own steam. He got elected on a Reform ticket. And what I'm hoping for is for Reform not only to smash the Tories and Labour in red wall areas, but I'm hoping for Reform to have not vetted their candidates particularly well. So you do have a number of more right-leaning, more racially aware individuals get elected who want to talk about issues such as demography, as we've seen with Rupert Lowe. So I'm actually quite excited about the elections tomorrow, and I hope it is another nail in the coffin of the two-party system.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, the system needs to go away. And, if nothing else, realize, I mean, you realize how big the stakes were, 20 years ago, right? Now everyone is like fully kind of like the way it's seeing all the stats, we're seeing like, oh, the reality of becoming a minority is going to be in the 2060s. Now it's like 2050s. And I even ran this through AI. If someone like Polanski was to go in, it would be the 2040s would become a minority. But and with all of that, the narrative is changing so quick, right? And so I kind of wanted to ask you, what we are seeing is simultaneously all of the Western world is becoming more nationalist. We have people like Patriot Front in the US and Thomas Sowell in Australia. And obviously, one of the things that he's kind of famous for is he was doing these marches of 200, 300 people strong, holding banners like "White Man Fight Back." And obviously, for the UK, that is a very extreme kind of position. But like people don't quite understand just how much there is a bias towards kind of the natives peoples. So I guess I wanted to ask, hypothetically, if a group was to do the exact same thing in the UK, what do you think would happen?
I think in the current climate we're living in, if you had a group sort of marching down the street at night, clad from head to toe in black, with balaclavas or face masks, I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't immediately detained under some kind of terror legislation. I believe that Britain is becoming more and more draconian, and the disturbing thing about the way British laws are changing is that it's actually terror legislation that is being routinely used to cover other offences. So, terrorism is the use or threat of the use of violence. So that's the important thing. Terrorism is the use of violence or threat thereof to bring about social, political, or religious change. Okay? And the key is violence or the threat of violence. And that's what it always was. So when I was brought up, terrorism was something like the Lockerbie bombing. Terrorism was something like an IRA bomb in a pub in Birmingham. Terrorism was, a shooting in Northern Ireland. Now, terrorism is putting stickers on a lamppost. Now, terrorism is having the wrong book on your bookshelf or having a document on your computer. And that is very, very worrying. But what's more worrying is terrorism isn't just having the book on your bookshelf. So there are certain books that you can buy in Waterstones, or you could buy in WH Smith, or you could order off Amazon today. And if you have the right political beliefs, having, and I say right in terms of the system's view, not my view.
Socially accepted. Well,
yeah, if you have the socially acceptable, system approved views, having that book on your bookshelf is absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with it. But having that same book on your bookshelf, if you hold the wrong views, is a terror offence. Now, that is very interesting because you're not just widening terror legislation, but you are turning terror legislation into something that essentially vets individuals on their political leanings. And that is what is increasingly used as the metric which decides who is a terrorist and who is not. So, for example, if you have a young, genderqueer LGBT activist and, he, she, they, whatever they call themselves, has got this book on their bookshelf, that is absolutely 100% fine. It's academic. They pose no threat to society, even though they might pose a threat to society. But if you're somebody who has talked about the problems of demographic change. You've railed against mass immigration. You may have talked about the influence of Zionists within British political institutions and over the government. And you have that book. You are a dangerous threat to the system. You need to, at the very least, have a visit from Prevent, when at worst, you need counter-terror officers storming your house at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. in order to drag you into the street and cart you off. And if people think I'm being, or people think I'm engaging in some kind of hyperbole over this, I'm not. You have to remember that Sam Melia was arrested for putting up stickers by counter-terror police. He was dragged to a police station, and when he first met his solicitor had his head in his hands and was like, I've never dealt with somebody like you. I've never dealt with somebody as dangerous as you. What on earth have you done? This case is like above what I'm comfortable dealing with. But I've got to deal with it because I'm the duty solicitor. So they went into the room, the police got out their evidence, and the solicitor was like, well, where's the evidence for this guy? And they're like, police like, this is it. And they're like, he's like, but you're counter-terror. This is counter-terror. And he's like, right, time out. I need to speak to my client. And he's like, so is this all about these stickers? And he's like, yeah. He's like, but you were dragged out of the post office with your arms behind your back by counter-terror police as your house was being simultaneously raided because they'd been following you and stalking you so they could do this special raid where you left the house, they grabbed you, they went in, they roughed up your wife, they went through, your underwear drawer, and it's stickers. And it dawned on this guy that this was madness. And this is how things are going. Unfortunately, we are moving into an era where it will be your opinions or your perceived opinions that get you onto a watch list. And that watch list will essentially brand you a terrorist. So when they do come for you, you're dealt with far more harshly than murderers or people who have committed horrible acts against women and children. And this is something that you would have seen in the old Soviet Union, in the old Soviet bloc, where if you held views which were perceived to be dangerous to the state and to the state narrative and to the prevailing ideology, which at the time was obviously Marxist communism, you were a greater threat to public safety than actual real criminals. And unfortunately, that affects us at every level. So to go back to your actual question, how could you do something like this in Britain? Well, you couldn't. I think if people started doing what the NSN had done in Australia, in Britain, they would be arrested under counter-terror legislation. They would be raided, their house, maybe remanded in custody for having the wrong book. The group that they formed would likely be outlawed. Anybody then, and remember, you are now a terrorist if you voice support for any group that was banned. And in the wake of the stabbings in Golders Green, they now want to make it a terror offence, or at least some kind of offence. And this is unreal. To be standing next to people at demonstrations who are saying things that could be a terror offence. You don't have to say them, but for you to not disagree with what those people are saying and to continue standing with them. So there was I did a full expose of this the other night on Rumble, okay? And this was on the BBC website, and you've had powerful individuals saying, if you go to a demonstration, it is not enough for you not to be saying words or phrases that could be illegal. You must do something to counteract that or leave the demonstration, because to simply be there and to show your support, your continued support for that demonstration, you're in some way complicit.
Wow.
So now they're trying to widen all this to some kind of, associative crime. So you can be stood next to somebody who says something, and the police say, look, we're arresting him, but we're also arresting you because you didn't distance yourself from him at the time when he was saying this. And this sounds like something out of some crazy dystopian sci-fi movie or novel, but this is where we are going. And the real kind of canary in the coal mine over this issue has been people like Sam Melia, but also the people who were arrested and fast-tracked through criminal trials in the wake of the Southport massacre. And those people genuinely were political prisoners, people jailed for up to 2 years for shouting at police officers, for shouting at police dogs, for one guy for kicking a police van. Now, look, I'm not suggesting anyone should go and kick a police van. It's a pretty stupid thing to do, but getting over a year in jail for kicking a police van seems grossly disproportionate, considering there are Labour Party councillors who have computers filled with the most grotesque and unlawful images of children. And I'm trying to put this in a way, by the way, to not get your channel demonetized. I'm not, there's certain words you can't use on YouTube now to describe these people, amazingly. But there are people like that, Labour councillors, that walk out of court with suspended sentences for being child abusers. Yet there are people who kicked a police van at a demonstration and they go to jail and spend, for sometimes, multi-month or even multi-year sentences. It's absolutely insane. And the silver lining to this rather awful cloud, though, is it tells you just how much the system fears these ideas. And just how much the system fears words. If the system didn't fear these words and these ideas, they wouldn't be passing these draconian laws. And I suppose that doesn't help you very much if you're sat in a jail cell, but it does tell you that the system is losing faith in its ability to continue on in its current form.
No, it's very true. It's very true. And to be honest, I think even these conversations, the conversations that you regularly have, Mark, and I don't want to shy away from this, because if we don't face this now, we are going to literally live in that kind of world. This is why I have these conversations on my channel. And with AI as well, like, if the wrong person was in power, everything you've done is going to be tracked and traced. They'll be easy to pull up, right? There's no question about it. So, like, and I don't say this to make myself seem like a hero or anything. No, I say this because, like, we're screwed either way. So it's one of them things people have to quickly get behind to really kind of push back on this. I have a quick video I wanted to show, just to kind of show the clear bias. Where are we?
Majority, this country belongs to us. So yes, we will defeat them at the ballot box, but when necessary, we fight them in the streets as well.
Tash Sultana, as we briefly spoke about. But yeah, this is just another clear example. If you have the right, the politically, socially accepted stance, you can literally call to arms people.
Look, you make a very good point, and I'll say this. I did a long video which people can see on my Rumble, and it's called Golders Green versus Southport. And in that video, I break down every single, and when I say every single, I mean every single response, major response that was given after Golders Green, and compare those responses to the responses post Southport, but also to the responses after the Nottingham spree killing carried out by Valdo Calacane, and to the response to the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017. Now, the reason I bring this up is because the chief rabbi, post the Golders Green stabbings, came out and said, words of condemnation are no longer enough. Now, I'm going to ask the audience today what they think the response would have been to me, Mark Collett, if I had gone on my social media, on Rumble, on Odyssey, on Telegram, and come out with a fiery speech saying, post Southport, post the murder of these 3 innocent little girls by a man of Rwandan descent, words of condemnation are no longer enough. Well, I think I'd have been arrested for incitement, because I think they would have said, look, what you're saying is this can't be dealt with politically. It can't be dealt with via dialogue, via speech, via some form of reasonable agreement. You're inciting violence. And it does shine a light on this 2-tier justice system, where when something happens to the indigenous people, it is dealt with in a completely different way to when something happens to an ethnic minority group. And in this particular case, in Golders Green, it happened to... And I want to make this really clear before I say anything else. I don't think anyone needs stabbing in Britain. I don't want to see anyone getting stabbed, going about their daily life. I don't want to see white people stabbed. I don't want to see Muslims stabbed. I don't want to see black people stabbed. I don't want to see Jews stabbed. But there's over 52,000 incidents involving knives in Britain. So 52,000 crimes involving bladed articles in Britain. Why was this one particular crime so much worse than the other 51,999? Why did this one particular crime lead to Kemi Badenoch scuttling to Golders Green as fast as her little legs would carry her? Why did Keir Starmer go there and make a speech? Why were MPs, quickly booking Ubers, taxis, and train fares to get to Golders Green when they're not talking about other crimes? I'll tell you this now. The Conservative Party leader at the time never went to Southport. Rishi Sunak never went to Southport. He released a written statement. I don't think Kemi Badenoch went to Southport. Now, you might say, well, she wasn't the leader of the Conservatives at the time, but she never went, did she? Keir Starmer turned up the day after and, laid some flowers, but he didn't convene a Cobra meeting. Now, he convened a Cobra meeting within hours of the Golders Green incident. And you're saying to yourself, if you sat there, well, look, Mark, you're talking about, again, and whites and the disparity in the way that white victims are treated and the disparity in the way that the politicians and the media treat Jewish victims and white victims. But hey, let's talk about blacks. Now, the Golders Green stabbing happened on Wednesday of last week. On the Saturday, there was a drive-by shooting in Brixton where four people were gunned down in broad daylight. I only saw one news story about that. I didn't see Keir Starmer or Kemi Badenoch scuttling to Brixton as fast as their little legs would carry them. I didn't see the BBC running 3 days of non-stop special coverage pinned to the front page. But 4 people lay in hospital, one of them in a serious condition, after a shooting in broad daylight where 4 people were injured, twice as many as were injured in Golders Green. So this lets you know there is an ethnic hierarchy in Britain. Now, I am very confident in saying that white Brits are at the very bottom. And I'm also very confident in telling you about who is at the top. And that is why I am so silenced. But the incidents I have just spoken of tell you that there is a bias. Now, if I was a prime minister, if I was the prime minister, and I heard about a stabbing of 2 people, I would be upset. But if later that week I heard that 4 people were gunned down in a drive-by shooting, I would say that was a more serious offence, because a gun crime is a more serious offence than a knife crime, and for double the number of people to be injured and for one of them to be critically injured is worse. So why weren't politicians lining up to talk about that. Because in the cases that politicians ignore, you can be safe in betting that the victim class is less important to them than the victim class at Golders Green. And that's why post Golders Green, there will be more laws passed, more money set aside for that particular community, and more people voicing opposition to dangerous speech and weeping tears, because the people stabbed at Golders Green are more important to the politicians and to the media than the black people shot in Brixton or the white girls stabbed in Southport. And something else I'll tell you. How long did it take? And I'll give you the answer, but have a think, because you might know this. How long did it take for a genuine, up-to-date picture of Axel Ruder Cabana to be featured in the press? It took nearly 6 months.
Wow.
The pictures of Essa Suleiman, the man who stabbed 2 in Golders Green, they were up on the BBC website in all their glory within 24 hours of the incident taking place. And they were accompanied with police body cam footage of the attack, CCTV footage of the attack, and numerous images and videos from passers-by. And they were appealing for more footage. Now, to this date, I have never seen a newspaper show one single image or video of the Southport attack. Why is that? Why do we get to see so much information about Golders Green but nothing about Southport? Was 2 reasons. Firstly, Southport was so bad, so horrific, so terrifying. Some of the victims were stabbed dozens and dozens of times. It was like a bloodbath. The attack was so frenzied that anyone involved in criminology would say that it was as if Axel Ruder Cabana had some emotional or sexual attachment to what he was doing. And I think if people saw those images, the state would say they would be radicalized. So it goes down the memory hole. But the Golders Green images and videos have to be shown because you have to feel sorry about that. You have to weep tears for that. But when you weep tears over Southport, why would you do that? Are you some kind of extremist? Are you suggesting that white people should have some form of in-group preference and feel sorry when people who look like them, little girls who could be their daughters or sisters, are stabbed? Why should you feel sorry for that? Oh, stabbed. We must all weep together. And if you think I'm engaging in hyperbole yet again, I'm not. And I'm going to read you a headline from The Guardian. Golders Green MP decries lack of vocal solidarity from Liberal left for the Jewish community. So when you cry over Southport, politicians will be like, what are you doing this for? I mean, yes, it's tragic, but don't look back in anger. I mean, they sang Don't Look Back in Anger after the Manchester Arena bombing. We weren't allowed to be angry over that. We weren't allowed to show solidarity for the white community over that. But when you're not crying enough over what happened in Golders Green, Sarah Sackman MP takes to the press to say, why aren't we crying enough over this? What? So when white people are killed, when black people are killed, we don't cry in the same way that we're told to cry when Jews are stabbed. And that tells you that this particular incident is being propagandized for political reasons because they want to pass new laws, which they are doing, that are going to take away the rights of everyone to freedom of speech. And you've got to also remember, Essa Suleiman and Axel Ruder Cabana are 2 very similar people. Both of them are of African descent. Suleiman came here as a child. He was born in Somalia. He was given British citizenship. Ruder Cabana, his parents came here from Rwanda, and he was born on British soil and again has British citizenship. But neither of them are ethnically English, Scottish, or Welsh. They're not indigenous. They are clearly people who have a claim to being a citizen of another land, They're not like us in really any way. The similarities between the attackers are very, very obvious, but the disparity in the way the two cases were dealt with are also very, very obvious. And I've got to say this, no politician in the wake of either of these two cases has come out and said, we need to stop people like that coming here. The response, which really is only in the case of Golders Green, because that's the only one of the two cases where there has been any meaningful response, the response was quite clear. Don't stop them coming here. Just pass new laws that will silence everyone that lives in Britain, including indigenous Brits. So that's really the definition of anarcho-tyranny, isn't it? You know, the government passes policies that bring about a state of criminal anarchy, and then the solution to that anarchy is tyrannical new laws that ultimately affects the law-abiding majority that weren't involved in those crimes in any way, and it affects the law-abiding majority by silencing them, and interestingly, silencing them from speaking about issues to do with ethnicity, race, religion, etc., because that's what it's going to be. And if people doubt what I'm saying, please, please don't, because this morning on the BBC website, and I'm going to quote directly, hate crime prosecutions to be fast-tracked after anti-Semitic attacks. So that's going to be the other new change, that all these new laws that they're passing will be laws that will be fast-tracked, and the prosecutions will be fast-tracked to make sure that's what's really dealt with. So as we get replaced as white people, we will now have fewer rights to speak out against that replacement, because that's what these hate crime laws will cover as well. And if we do speak out, we will be fast-tracked through the criminal courts ahead of murderers, rapists, and other real criminals.
Yeah. And I mean, like, if we were to have this conversation even 2 years ago, people really wouldn't know what you're talking about. Right. It's amazing how much the narrative has shifted so much that now we can actually fully entertain these conversations and understand, like, oh, this is real. The hierarchy you spoke about, this is real. It's becoming clear as day. And even if you were to think about it logically, like, let's forget about England. You'd think if there's just a random country, whoever had the biggest proportion of population, the biggest demographic, that would get the most attention, right? You're pleasing the crowd. Jewish people make up 0.5% of our demographics. So it doesn't make any sense from that stance. And even if you thought about, well, in an Islamic country, who are they going to prioritize? Obviously Islam. In Israel, who are they going to prioritize? Obviously their people. That only makes logical sense, right? You should prioritize the people who have built that country, who are the majority, who have literally built the culture which everyone gets to enjoy. But for us, it's completely the opposite, right? So it's like, okay, maybe there's a problem. And actually, I have a really good video I wanted to show, just to show kind of, I mean, everyone's kind of waking up to this influence, but this one really, really sold it for me.
If you ever were in doubt about what the British establishment means or is or represents, have a look at this. See, my question is, why is this stabbing getting back-to-back, floor-to-floor, wall-to-wall coverage on all media outlets when there's stabbings every day in London? Every single day there's stabbings. Why is it when the Jewish community is supposedly under attack that it gets wall-to-wall, floor-to-floor coverage? And why is this now being leveraged by the establishment?
Literally sums it up to a T.
Look, I want to just say one thing about that. Yeah. I'll try and keep this sort of short because I know I give very full answers, but it's interesting to see the response. And specifically, you mentioned stabbings in London. Now, I remember a good number of years ago, Sadiq Khan was widely quoted in the press as saying terrorism is part and parcel of living in a big city. Basically, if you're going to live in a big metropolitan city like London, which is a global hub, you've got to expect some bad things. Living in London, according to him, gives you all these great benefits. It's such a wonderful city. But one of the downsides, which you've got to accept, it's part and parcel, is people will target it with acts of terrorism. He wasn't saying the stabbings in Golders Green were part and parcel of life in London, was he? Now, stabbings are part and parcel, unfortunately, of many people's lives in London. And that is something which the police have largely turned a blind eye to, that the establishment have refused to investigate due to the unfortunate ethnicity of those carrying out the stabbings, and the fact that would make the crime statistics look alarming to white people who are already concerned about the effects of being replaced. But all of that is hushed up, part and parcel of life, something we have to deal with, a problem, a youth problem. That's what they like to say, isn't it? Youth is how they describe it. But this wasn't, a youth problem. This wasn't part and parcel. This was a very serious issue. And again, it shines a really, really powerful light on the language and attitudes of politicians when white people are victims, or when black people are victims in many cases, because lots of the people who are stabbed in London on a daily basis are actually black. Politicians treat those stabbings and those sort of terror attacks very, very differently. And bear in mind as well, this is just a slight addition, that Southport was never classified by the government as a terrorist incident, despite the fact Axel Ruda Cabana had numerous Islamic terror documents on his computer, and he had ordered all of the parts to make ricin and was attempting to make ricin in his own bedroom. But it wasn't a terror attack. Within hours of the attack taking place in Golders Green, it was a terror attack. And again, the double standards just keep rolling. I mean, as I said, I did a 2-hour show on the double standards and reviewed every meaningful response to Golders Green and compared them to other attacks. I'm not going to dominate this show with those points, but you can see the full thing on my Rumble.
Yeah, and that's an important thing too. Mark is literally cancelled on everything. So if you haven't already, please head over to his Rumble. Subscribe, comment on this as well. It means a lot. It does push the algorithm out there.
And I've got a Substack now, by the way. I'm releasing 2 Substack articles a week. So if people want to follow me there, you can follow me there. And I'm trying to build that up too. So I do put out a lot of content a week on my own channels. I put out 3 videos or live streams a week and 2 Substack articles, as well as doing interviews and guest appearances like this. So please do support me if you can on my own platforms.
Yeah, exactly. It's I'm grateful for all this knowledge that we're able to talk about. But they are making it harder and harder. They've right now they've killed the algorithm on my YouTube. So we'll see how it goes as time goes on. Hopefully it picks back up. But since last time, again, like the goalposts are moving constantly. But it seems that the reputation of Israel is just getting from bad to worse. And it's like if it's this bad now, I didn't think it could get any lower, but it just somehow keeps amazing me, keeps surprising me. But what do you think of the current sentiment of Israel worldwide right now?
Well, I think Israel at one point had enjoyed a lot of sympathy, especially within the West. It was never a country that was loved in the Middle East for obvious reasons. But in the West, it enjoyed a great degree of sympathy. However, post-October the 7th, the level of sympathy for Israel has declined dramatically. And that's for 2 reasons. The first, and I've got to be honest about this, is not actually a particularly heartening reason. One of the reasons Israel now enjoys less sympathy in the West is because the West is more multicultural than it's ever been. So in Britain now, indigenous people make up around 70% of the population. So that's white Britons on the census, the English, the Scottish and the Welsh. However, that 30% who are now here that aren't the same as us do have different values, different morals, and do see the world differently. And many of them are Muslims, people who've come from the Middle East, and they have no love for Israel. In fact, they are the most hostile to Zionism and Israel. So that has caused a change. But I think even amongst typical white Britons, Israel's standing has declined dramatically due to the genocide in Gaza. And I've got to say this, post October the 7th, you've even seen a shift amongst what I call the Zio boomers. So the Zio boomers are kind of your Daily Mail reading, Israel supporting people who are probably, 60 plus. And they're always in the Daily Mail comments saying Israel has a right to defend itself. This is just what the Palestinians deserve. And post October the 7th, or in the immediate aftermath of October the 7th, those people were absolutely staunchly supporting Israel. And you could see that in the Daily Mail comments section. But over the past few years, that support, even amongst the most ardent supporters of Israel, people who would probably identify as Zionists, in fact, has dropped off. Because what you've seen are the most incredible, the most stomach-churning human rights abuses that have been categorized as by the UN. And fundamentally, and I've done articles on this on my Substack. I did an article about this, talking about how now in France, as a response to more and more French citizens saying that Israel, is a terrorist state, you actually are seeing pushes within French Parliament by Jewish lawmakers to outlaw criticism of Israel, which is incredible. And I think they'll try and do the same thing here ultimately, because it isn't just the rapidly growing ethnic minority communities in places like France, Britain, and Germany who are voicing opposition to Israel. It's actually now white people, and even white people who historically supported Israel, that are sick of seeing what Israel is doing, killing aid workers, blocking medical, sanitary, and food aid from entering Gaza, strafing civilian convoys, snipering women and children. It is horrific. And just yesterday, I published an article called Israel, the Global Leader in Human Organ Trafficking, which actually details in part another ghoulish practice that's been going on post the Israeli invasion of Gaza, which is dead bodies of Palestinians being removed, taken to Israel, and their organs, their skin, and even parts of their eyes being harvested and held in Israel to donate to wealthy Israeli recipients who require organ donations. It's and shockingly, this has all been widely documented, but is kept out of the Western media. So if people want to read more about that horrific practice, that's all up on my Substack. And I name names, I cite sources, and I talk about the fact that this organ trafficking, which Israel is at the center of, doesn't just affect Palestinians. It's actually something that has gone on over 5 different continents. Now, there are only 7 continents. No one's trafficking organs from Antarctica because it's only penguins that live there. So it tells you just how truly global this abhorrent trade is. But at the center of it is Israel. And as these things come out, and in the digital age, in this connected world we live in, it's easier to get hold of information like this. But when you collate it all, you see that Israel is carrying out activities that would be seen by any right-minded person as truly abhorrent. And now, you have the prospect of Netanyahu and other leading members of the Israeli regime being charged with genocide, arrest warrants being issued for them. I don't think anything will ever come of it, but it is causing a shift in opinions, and more people are turning against Israel. And again, this can be seen by the fact that both Britain, France, even Ukraine are in the process of or have passed new laws that outlaw criticism of Israel.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. Exactly. I don't know if you saw this. This is only a few days old. It's just an article this time. But like the narrative has just gone so bad, quintupled its budget, 730 million to try and control the narrative.
Well, the incredible thing about this is, and I always ask, this is something I say, this is a sort of a Mark Collett soundbite, but I always say to people, imagine if there was a newspaper or media outlet in Russia that was nakedly stating that Russia was quintupling its budget for influencing the hearts and minds of people in Western countries. There would be outrage. Imagine if Russia was saying, well, we're going to spend $730 million on ensuring that, you know, influencers, politicians, heads of state, and important dignitaries like royals, etc., were all taking a more pro-Russian stance. Well, there would be, congressional hearings over it. There would be a Cobra meeting. There would be a Cobra meeting saying we're having to raise, the level of security in Britain. The security threshold will be raised to make sure that people aren't taking this money. But Israel can openly say, look, we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to pump out our propaganda, and no one says anything, which tells you just how much power they have. Because when a foreign entity can boast about the money they're spending in order to subvert, Western thinking, but no one wants to do anything about it. No one wants to pass sanctions. No one wants to investigate where that money's going. It's absolutely incredible. And obviously, when they're talking about 730 million, I would actually argue that's the tip of the iceberg, because when you look at the power that lobbying groups like AIPAC hold in countries like America, you can see why politicians are dancing to the Israeli tune. And the same is true in the UK. Look at where politicians holiday. Look at who gives them money. Look at how many sitting MPs every year take fully paid trips to Israel. They go to Israel, they get gifts from Israel, and all of these things are brushed under the carpet. I would argue that if a single MP took a fully paid trip to Moscow and met members of the Russian establishment, that would cause front page outrage. Yet dozens, if not hundreds, of sitting MPs have travelled to Israel over the last decade and taken bungs, and it's all something that's smiled upon. And that tells you the level of power that Israel has. Because when somebody does something that is illegal, or at least extremely questionable, I would argue it is actually illegal, because if it was Russians doing this, there would be criminal charges filed, and there have been people jailed for accepting money from Russian sources. So I would argue this is actually illegal. But when people do something that's illegal, but they are willing to do it so openly and talk about it so very freely, that is an indicator that the people behind those schemes, the people at the top of the ladder, are so absolutely calm because they are assured that they will never, ever be prosecuted. It gives you a real view of the power imbalance in today's society. And again, the people who benefit most from that power imbalance are Israeli Zionists and people at the center of the Israeli lobbying industry. And I call it an industry because it's worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars per year.
You're right. You're right. We're all kind of becoming so much more aware just how much influence they have, how they are trying to, control the narrative and all these bits. But, bringing it back to the UK, You were talking a lot about reform earlier. My focus seems to be Restore Britain. It seems to be these guys which are steamrolling it right now. But obviously, there's been a few rumors. There's some people who are a bit too black-pilled on the whole thing. But now it's like all a bit more established. What are your thoughts on Restore?
Well, on one hand, I have to say, Rupert Lowe seems to be saying a lot of the right stuff, and that's good. You know, I want politicians to start saying having a British passport doesn't make you British. That's a good point. You know, we need to differentiate fundamentally in British law between the idea of British citizenship and being indigenous. That's a massive issue. Now, the historic nations, England, Scotland, and Wales, they are tied to individual ethnic groups, the English, the Scottish, and the Welsh. And collectively, the English, the Scottish, and the Welsh are referred to on the census as white Britons. Now, there is a huge difference between white Britons and people who have just floated over here on the last boat, filled out a form correctly, which has been stamped by some government apparatchik, you know, filed away in some filing cabinet, and that makes them British. They're then issued a passport, and they're a British citizen. And having someone in Parliament making that point, like Rupert Lowe, is very, very important to our cause, and it's something I celebrate. However, Restore Britain are yet to stand a single candidate. And my concern is that at the moment we are getting to the point where sooner rather than later we will come to the last general election where it is likely that white Brits can make a change and turn around what is going on via parliamentary democracy. And the concern is restore and reform both sound very similar. To the average voter, not to people watching this stream who will read both their manifestos and realise that Rupert Lowe at the moment appears to be a much, much better option in terms of policy and talking points than Nigel Farage. Most normal people won't go that deep. They will see two parties. They will see them both branded in a very similar manner. They will see them both making very similar talking points on their leaflets. Because look, when Restore put out their first leaflets, those leaflets aren't going to be, look, white Britons need to survive. They're going to be, stop immigration, you know, deport the illegals. Well, Farage has already said all of that many times over. In fact, he's tweeted that himself. So what are you going to have? You're going to have confusion. You're going to have normal people saying, what is Restore? What is Reform? We know Nigel Farage. We're not sure who Rupert Lowe is. Some of those people, I think the majority, will carry on voting Reform. Some of those people, a minority, will start voting Restore. And the problem is, you are now going to have two very well-funded anti-immigration populist right parties that will be competing for the same vote. That can be a disaster. Now, ultimately, we've talked about the 70-30 split. And the 70-30 split is important because if 50% of white Britons, which would be a pretty high watermark, all said, we're voting for the same party because we want to stop immigration, that would result in 35% of the vote going to an anti-immigration party at the next general election. And to win a general election, you need about 32% plus of the vote. Labour got in last time at one of the lowest totals we've ever seen. Labour took, under Keir Starmer, about 32% of the overall share of the vote, which is a bit of a low for a party to get in and take that kind of majority. Now, ultimately, if Reform were to take 35%, that would be enough to win it. Okay? But let's say Restore stand in every seat and Reform stand in every seat, and they fight each other to the standstill. A bloody battle between the Faragists and those who are more ethno-nationalist in their outlook. And let's say Reform end up taking 20% and Restore took 15%. And I think that's being very, very generous to Restore, because it's very, very difficult for a new party with a relatively unknown leader to take so much of the vote. But let's say that's how it fell. And that's being very, very generous to Restore. That might be the reason why Labour take a second term in 2029. Now imagine that. Two parties perceived to be almost identical by the average voter, cancelling each other out and allowing a virulently anti-white, pro-migration party back into power at an absolutely crucial point in history, which would then mean, if they held on, and they would be absolutely legally within their right to hold on till 2034, we're in even more of a dire position. And I think I explained this on the last interview we did, that we're declining on average post the year 2000 at a rate of 0.8% per year. But that's accelerating. But let's just work on the 0.8% average. That means that over every 5-year general election cycle, we decline at 4%. So between 2025 and 2029, we will reduce by about 3%. That's being generous. That's been generous to us, by the way. That's best case scenario. And then over the next 4 years by another 4%. So that would take us in 2034 down to around 62 to 63% of the overall population. That is very worrying. And with Labour's new changes, which will grant 16-year-olds the right to vote, and the reason they're granting 16-year-olds the right to vote is because they know that in the bracket 16 to 18, there is a far higher level of diversity than there is in the bracket 70 plus. They're stacking the deck and they're running down the clock at the same time. And my concern is, if these two parties fight each other to a standstill, what are we going to see? How is this going to play out? What is going to happen? And the answer is quite possibly that two populist right parties will cancel one another out. And if that is the case, we could be seeing our last reasonable chance to vote our way out of this at parliamentary level go down the toilet. Because in 2034, we would be about 62 to 63% of the population, meaning that if half the white Britons voted for a populist party, assuming that then there would only be one populist right party on the ballot, we would only be able to get around 31 to 31.5% of the vote, which would probably be just under the threshold of what we would need to win, which would mean post 2034, whatever populist party hopes to get in would have to do a number of deals with ethnic minority communities. And some people are completely opposed to that. So some people will say, we won't even deal with people from ethnic minority backgrounds. We don't even want to talk to them. Now, I'm quite open to talking to people. As you know, I've done big interviews with people from ethnic minority communities. I've talked about peaceful separation. I believe in diplomacy. I'm not ashamed to say that. And we're already seeing this problem. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think you'll find it interesting. So we spoke earlier that Reform have done really well in standing 4,812 seats. Okay? That's impressive. But people are complaining that many of them aren't white. A lot of their candidates, well, I say a lot of their candidates, at the last general election, I think about 3 to 4% of their candidates were non-white, maybe less. But let's say at this one, it's a lot higher. You're seeing them stand a number of non-white candidates in places like London and Birmingham. But my answer to that is, if you want to win nationally and you want to take seats in places like Birmingham and London, where white people, white Brits especially, are already a minority, do you have to interact with these people? I mean, look at London. There are 32 boroughs in London, and each one of those 32 boroughs is essentially, the city is so big as a whole, Greater London, that each one of those 32 boroughs is equivalent to a city like Sunderland or Leeds or Bradford, Nottingham, Wakefield. And because of that, each one of those boroughs has the same local governance and legislative power as those cities that I've spoken of. But many of those boroughs are places where white Britons are a minority, sometimes around 10% of the population. So if you were going to take control of those councils, you would need to interact, at the very least, ask for the non-white vote or the non-Indigenous vote. And in some cases, to get a candidate on the ballot paper, you would need to deal with the immigrant community. Now, Reform are doing that, and some people disagree with it. But the problem is, we are moving, as we said in the last interview I did with you, to a multi-ethnic sectarian society. And you either say, well, look, we don't want to win a majority in Parliament. What we want is to represent our own people in places that are white British, and we want to ensure those white British areas pull up the drawbridge and don't become any more diverse. Or you say what Reform are saying, that they're more civic nationalist, they want to win nationally, they want to take power at parliamentary level and make national policy. But to do that, when there are 21 million people in Britain that are of some form of ethnic minority background, you have to at least reach out to them in some degree. And in areas that have been almost completely transformed, if you're going to be on the ballot paper, you have to reach out to them and at least talk to them, if not, engage with them. And this is an important debate to have, because we're not living in the 1970s. I was born in 1980, and in 1980, Britain was 95% plus white British. So you could easily in 1980 say, we want to take the country back. If 50% of white Britons vote for our party, we'll take a massive majority in Parliament. And at that point, it's over. We're turning things around. We're taking a different trajectory. But when you are dipping beneath 70% of the population, it gets harder, because we as white Britons are the least ethnocentric of the groups living in Britain, which makes it hard for us. People saying, well, we're still 70%, it's easy. No, it would be an absolute walkover if we were 70% and thought the same way as Muslims and think and vote along ethnic lines, but we don't. We won't vote for our own people. And there is a sizable proportion of the white British population that are absolutely invested in whites becoming a minority and are, from our point of view, ethnically or racially suicidal in their outlook. So this is going to get harder. And my enthusiasm for what Rupert Lowe is saying is tempered by my knowledge of electoral politics, my understanding of how hard it is for a smaller party to break through, and also my knowledge of the ability for a party like Restore to come in, split the vote, and for that to result in worst case scenario, which would be a Labour win, or even worse, a Labour Green coalition, which would then, oh my God. And this is the problem with parliamentary democracy. Let's say you have a parliamentary constituency in which 100 candidates stand. Okay, 100. Okay? And one of those candidates gets 1.1% of the vote, and every other candidate gets an exactly equal share. That means that the candidate that got 1.1% goes to Parliament, and 98.9% of the constituents who turned out and voted are unrepresented in Parliament. That's frightening. Wow. And you might say, look, Mark, that's never going to happen. You're never going to get 100 candidates. No, you're not. But imagine if Restore and Reform were both on the ballot paper and they both take 25% of the vote and Labour take 26%. Well, Labour win. It's a Labour MP that's elected. And you have 50% of the people in that ward, an actual, de facto majority voting for migration control, for deportations, for an end to woke policies. But Labour get 26% of the vote. A Labour MP walks into Parliament, and despite the popular vote actually voting against immigration, you get a candidate returned to Parliament who lets more immigrants in. That's what can happen, because first past the post is one of the worst electoral systems when it comes to direct representation. It's the best if you want a system that ensures one party rules completely, because that rarely happens under PR. PR, you end up with, power sharing groups. So you might end up in Germany with the AfD taking 35% of the vote and being the biggest parties, but all the other parties come together, form a power sharing bloc and don't let them have any say. And people say that's unfair, but it is at least representative of the population. What we're seeing could produce results under first past the post that would be absolutely unrepresentative. And you might end up in a situation in 2029 with Restore and Reform producing an outcome that sees enough people voting for anti-immigration measures to get a party into governance with a massive majority. But because those votes are split across two parties, you end up with Labour coming back in and us all seeing whoever comes in put the pedal to the metal in terms of replacement, because they know if they raise the demographic shift from 0.8% to 1.2%, which is just a 50% increase, each year, you would then see the shift be 6% over the next 5 years. And 6%, when you're already at 67, 66%, whatever, is absolutely catastrophic. And remember, bear this in mind, guys. Don't underestimate what they've just done. They've just allowed 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. And they've done that specifically because, and I know people go, the young people are the most based in society. No, they're not. If they were, Labour wouldn't have just given them the vote. Labour have given them the vote because they have probably spent millions of pounds polling people of that age group and discovered that the most likely mainstream party for 16 and 17-year-olds to vote for is Labour. They wouldn't have done it otherwise. Labour aren't going to say, we're going to let 16 and 17-year-olds vote because they're more likely to vote Reform. They've let 16 and 17-year-olds vote because if you look in schools, the white British population of school age or younger is around 60%. And of those white Brits, they have grown up in a multicultural society. They're more likely to have black, Asian, non-white, migrant friends. They're more likely to be statistically LGBT, trans, to hold these ideas. And the 40% who are of ethnic minority background are highly unlikely to vote for a party like Reform or Restore. So Labour are not only demographically replacing us, but they're changing who can vote to make the voter base more diverse by lowering the age. They're doing everything they can to ensure that they run down the clock so that we can't vote for change. And they will understand the statistics that I'm giving you today. They will have already done these mathematical equations. They will be sat in the dark halls of Parliament, number crunching these things with far greater accuracy than I can ever do. And bear in mind, as well, there are other very dirty tricks they can play. Look what just happened in Spain. An amnesty for 500,000 illegals. Well, there are between 1.4 and 2 million illegals living in Britain now, depending on whose figures you're taking as gospel, okay? And let's say it's 2 million, and the government gives amnesty to half of those. I mean, Boris Johnson, one of the most evil scumbags to ever become a prime minister, one of the worst, probably the worst post-war prime minister we ever had, definitely the worst post-war prime minister we had in terms of immigration. Holds the record on letting the most people in a single year, in both real terms both raw terms, should I say, and in terms of net migration. But when he was the mayor of London, he actually called for an amnesty for all illegals living in London. So let's just draw a line under it, have an amnesty, get them paying tax, get them on the books as proper Londoners. People should never have voted for him. I warned people about him. No one listened, and I warned people he's not going to give you what you want. But imagine an amnesty. An amnesty tomorrow could grant up to 2 million people, all of migrant background, most of whom are overwhelmingly as ethnically and racially alien to us as possible. They're overwhelmingly non-white. That would be 2 million, up to 2 million extra voters that would never vote for Restore or Reform. I mean, imagine the effect that would have. They have so many dirty tricks they can play. We have such little time in terms of civilizational development, because 5-10 years in terms of civilization is nothing. We have so little time. They have so many dirty tricks they can play. They have so much money, so many resources. We have this maybe one or two rolls of the dice left in terms of a shift at parliamentary level, and we could end up squandering it by having two almost identical parties that cancel each other out. That's the kind of problem we have. And I don't think Rupert Lowe is a bad man. I think he says a lot of good things. I largely support the points he's made so far. But I do see this major issue that, unfortunately, a lot of enthusiastic young people and people who are new to politics aren't talking about. They're not talking about this potential splitting of the vote because they haven't been as deeply embedded in politics as I have, and they haven't seen these things play out at the ballot box as I have.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, you talk about the younger vote. These are the people who have had the most indoctrination. And like you say, they're more exposed to the multicultural society. They are just kind of going to go with the masses, and they've been taught that since, that's just the education which has been really pushed heavily over the last 10 years. Also, we are seeing a huge rift between men and women, right? And again, it's like men will typically always go more conservatively, women will always go a bit more liberal. And in recent years, that slant on going liberal has just gotten more and more extreme. The divide is only getting bigger and bigger. How do you feel about the woman question? And have you seen like the YouGov data showing like if only women voted, and it's like huge, like 80% Green Party? Have you seen this?
I haven't seen this, but it doesn't surprise me.
Can I show you it?
You can show me it, and I will explain it. I'll explain the issue here.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Let me just. Here we go. So 18 to 50, House of Commons if only women could vote, right? Okay. Sorry. All yours.
So, firstly, I never really take these polls super seriously because often people who produce these polls produce them because they have an answer they want and they make sure the poll gives them the answer that they want. So I would have to ask, where were these women polled? Who were these women? Whereabouts did they live? Etc. So, if you're polling someone who lives in an affluent borough of London, you're polling them in social services because that's where they work, and you're polling them on, the question is actually, would you vote for a racist or anti-racist candidate? Then you interpret that as them voting green, because often they don't say who you're going to vote for. They ask you a series of leading questions and then determine who you would vote for based on those leading questions. So there's lots of ways to make polls say what you want. Very rarely do people ask. I've done polls before the public, and we always ask them very direct questions like, are you aware white Britons are going to be a minority by 20, whatever. Does this make you happy? Does this make you unhappy? Or are you not bothered? That would be an honest poll, and we've done polls like that. So firstly, I don't know where this data's come from. I don't know how they produced this data, and I don't know the people that they polled, the way they polled them.
Just a caveat then. I did see, so this was from the Times, that they put Green's voting base 64% women. I don't know if you saw that.
Look, but I will readily admit that when it comes to voting preference, women are far more, or appear to be far more liberal than men. And I'm going to say something now that I hope people will wait for me to explain fully before they judge me harshly. Now, these voting preferences make it appear that women are far more liberal than men. However, I don't think they are. Women are far more empathetic than men. That is a fact. Now, they have higher levels of empathy because they have evolved to have higher levels of empathy. So, for example, men were out hunting, gathering, building, conquering, protecting, mining. That's what men did. And to be a hunter, to be a warrior, to be a protector and a conqueror, you have to have much lower levels of empathy. If you have empathy for the deer that you're stalking, you don't eat, and then you and your family die. If you have empathy for the invader that's trying to cut your throat and take the deer that you hunted 2 days ago, you either die, that's worst case scenario, or best case scenario, you hand over the deer and you go hungry until you can catch another one. If you have empathy for the people that you're conquering, your crusade is not successful and you don't return home to your women and children. And worse, those that you tried to conquer may turn up in your homeland and take your women and children. So men having high levels of empathy doesn't work out well, especially not historically. However, women are quite different. Women have to look after children. And if you have children, you know that they can be quite a handful. They cry, they moan, they need constant care and attention, they do quite annoying things that dads often get very angry about, but mums are filled with empathy. That's why they're good at child rearing. They have empathy for the children in the home. They have empathy for other children. They are there when their children fall, when their men come home wounded or ill. That's the role women play. And a woman's role is based around a high level of empathy. And women with higher levels of empathy make better mothers, better carers, better wives. They are a better support role to their male counterpart who needs a lower level of empathy, because as we discussed earlier, if he has a high level of empathy, he doesn't do his job very well. And that's why we're complementary pairs. That's why we need each other. And that's why the male is always, or has historically been, the disciplinarian in the home, whereas the mother has been the caregiver and the comfort giver. Do we all agree with that? I hope we do. Now imagine a homogenous, natural society. The woman's empathy is centered on her group. The woman's empathy is centered on the group that she's a part of. It's centered on her children, the children that look like her children, the old people that are part of the community, or the man that she gives her care to. Now imagine a group of people who are preyed upon by a foreign group. And that foreign group controls the media, the press, the educational establishment, and spends countless billions on specifically targeting and subverting our group's female empathy. And it makes our females, instead of being empathetic towards our group, instead of them caring about the white girls that are being groomed and abused, instead of caring about the white boys that are being bullied and picked upon and attacked by migrants, that powerful campaign of subversion turns a white woman's empathy into care for an invading force. So instead, she feels sorry for the migrant invader. She feels sorry for the migrant child on the boat. She feels sorry for the starving Africans and wants to bring them here to give them everything. And at that point, we realize what's happened. The natural empathy that white women had, that made them great mothers and carers and helped them to bring up generations of strong warrior men that went and conquered the world, has been subverted. So instead of wanting to bring up their own warrior offspring, their empathy leads them to vote for liberal policy so they can care for the entire world. It's almost a little bit like, if you want to draw a crude analogy, the role the cuckoo plays. So the cuckoo lays its eggs in other birds' nests, doesn't it? And then the bird brings up the cuckoo's offspring rather than its own. So it actually cares for the bird that has supplanted its eggs into the nest. So it essentially cares for its own replacements. So when that mother bird finally flies out of the nest, she doesn't leave sparrows or crows or blackbirds. She leaves a nest full of cuckoos which replace her offspring. And that's kind of what's happened here. Our women have been brainwashed and have swallowed this propaganda over decades, and it has been a long and expensive project that's taken place. But our women have been brainwashed, and now, rather than crying over the girls that were killed at Southport, rather than crying over the girls that are groomed, rather than crying over, the regular horrendous sexual assaults that take place at the hands of migrants, they cry over the migrants that can't get on a boat and might fall out of the boat in the English Channel. As I said, they cry over the babies in the Middle East that are homeless because of Israeli bombing campaigns. They cry over African kids starving, and they want to look after them. So now our women, like the birds that raised, fledgling cuckoos, they are actually working against us and speeding our replacement. But this is because they've been subverted. Now, the poor answer to this, or the incorrect answer, is for white men to hate white women. The wrong answer is for us to say our own women are our greatest problem and for us to turn against them. And that actually plays into the enemy's hands. If we start hating white women and saying, because you've been subverted, we hate you, and we've got to put the shackles back on you and insult you, that actually creates more of a problem. Because that's what our enemies want. Our enemies want the counterbalance to subverted white women to be MGTOW, women-hating men that go their own way and say, we're not going to interact with white women and have children anymore, because that makes things even worse. The answer to this problem is to embrace, or try to embrace, white women who have fallen for this propaganda and to bring them back our way, and that can be successful. I've met many women in my life who initially wanted to be career women, wanted to put work first, wanted to embark on a childless life, and after talking to them, I've won them over. And that's what we need to do. We need to focus on bringing our people back together as a whole, ensuring that white men and white women straighten out their thinking, form couples, raise children, and come together as a powerful ethnocentric community that defends itself, where the men become men again, the women become women again, and male and female endeavours are focused upon providing for the next generation of white Britons. That can be done. It's a difficult job, but it can be done. But making the reductive argument that white women are somehow all demons and are the problem, that will actually exacerbate that problem, make it far worse. And that's why things such as the MGTOW movement and the sort of, the male-centric anti-female movement are so poisonous, because our salvation lies in white men and white women getting along with each other like they used to and having lots of children. Our salvation doesn't lie in us having some intraracial spat between white men and white women, which gets worse over time and reduces our birth rate to new lows.
Yeah, it does sound like an impossible task, because we are already seeing that above 50% of the women above 30 don't have kids. Never happened before in English history. And it does make you wonder, why is that the case? Because the sophistication of the propaganda campaign is incredible, really, that it's been able to achieve this. Because we all know, the biggest victims of the migrants too are in fact the girls, right? Who are even more vulnerable when they reject their fellow countrymen, right? When they push away the guys, and men are guilty for causing this rift as well. But the more that they push away, the more vulnerable they are, to which it seems to then accelerate this process of getting migrants in, to which they're going to be the most vulnerable against. It's just a mess. How you try and sew that back together, I don't know.
It's very hard to sew it back together, because it's not just the propaganda, it's also the financial climate in which we live. So when my dad bought his first house with my mum, they bought a house for £2,000. Now, the average house price in Britain is now well over £200,000. So we're talking about 100-fold increase in the price of a house. Okay, that's a lot, and it prices people out. But the cost of living is much higher. When my father and my mother were raising myself and my sister, my mum was a stay-at-home mum, as were most mothers that I knew at the time. Most of my friends, their mums were stay-at-home mums, and if they did work, they either did a little bit of part-time work, helped with a family business, but they weren't career women. But that is something that's largely unaffordable now. It is very, very hard for a man. It's impossible for you to find a house for £2,000. And it's very, very difficult for a man to earn so much that he can pay for both himself, a woman, and children. And this places us in a position where women have been increasingly forced into the workplace. And then when couples do have children, the cost of living is so high that they limit the number of children that they have. And some people now have other pressures placed upon them. Some people feel that if they have children, they won't be able to afford a good living. Some people say, well, we'll have to cut the number of holidays we have. There is also the problems of materialism, hedonism, the fact people are greedy and selfish, the fact that people put having a good time as a greater priority than having a family. The government, the media, it tells people, you're going to live forever. You're going to enjoy. I went out on a date with a woman once, and straight away I used to get to the meat of the matter. I'd be like, look, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a traditional woman. I want to have children. I want to settle down. If that's for you, let's enjoy the rest of this meal and see where we go. If it's not for you, let's finish our starters and pack up and leave, because I'm not paying for you to have a main course if we're not going anywhere. It sounds quite rude, but some women hated it and walked out. Some women liked it, and one woman really liked it because I got 2 children now, and that's how I behaved. But I did meet women who said to me, I don't want kids. I don't want to be doing this. When I'm 60 and 70, I'm going to be one of those cool pensioners partying with my friends in Ibiza. They actually believe that. But no, you're not, love. What you're going to be is a mad cat woman lying in a bed, staring at your Employee of the Month awards, wondering why no one's visiting you, and dreading the next visit from your African carer who barely speaks English. And when you do finally die, they'll discover your remains 10 days later, and you'll have been partially eaten by those cats you adored so much. That's the reality of growing old and alone, without children, not having people to care, not having people there for you, not having grandkids running all over that keep you young and happy. Because you ain't going to be partying in Ibiza when you're 70. That would be ridiculous. You'd look like a fool and your body wouldn't take it. You'd be dead long before that if you're drinking that quantity of alcohol and snorting that many drugs at the age of 70. You ain't surviving. But people have been captured by something that I've termed Peter Pan syndrome, where they all want to remain like kids for the rest of their life. They all want to relive their university years, their Ibiza years forever. But that's not natural and that's not healthy. What is natural and healthy is growing old and knowing what part of your life you're in. And that doesn't mean you can't have fun. I still go to the gym. I still go running. I still go out for the odd nice meal. I still play games with my mates on an evening when the kids are in bed. But I raise my children. I do my gardening. I go on family holidays now. And I can tell you, to some people, it might fill them with dread going to a family holiday park with kids rather than going to Ibiza and Gran Canaria and drinking themselves, silly every night. But I can honestly tell you, although I look back on my youth with a certain degree of fondness and a certain degree of regret, I really do love taking my kids to the beach. I love taking my kids to a water park. I love taking my kids to the arcades and watching them play the 2p machines and trying to win them things with the grabber claw. You go through different phases of your life. You have a spring, you have a summer, you have an autumn, and eventually you have a winter. But the fact is, you have to know where you are and embrace it and make the most of it. You can't hope to live in spring forever. There is no Peter Pan. And those who try to be Peter Pan will end up lonely and cold when it comes to the winter period of their existence. And part of this is driven by the media. It's driven by Hollywood. It's driven by these horrible, people that have managed the cuckoo process we talked of earlier. They're selling our people garbage and our people are slurping it up. And it's part of the reason why we're a dying race, because we've embraced everything that is bad for us. And a lot of the things that we've embraced are lies. We've embraced the lie of eternal youth. No one gets eternal youth, but you do live on forever if your blood carries on. People who want to live forever, when I was younger, I wanted to live forever. I said that on a documentary. I wanted to be one of these. I felt like I would, live to be 100. I felt like I'd be this guy that would, achieve something massive in politics, and I'd be forever young because I was full of so much energy. Now I realize that I'm young again because of my son and daughter. and that one day I'll be sat, in the twilight years of my life, and hopefully I'll be sat with grandchildren running around. And that's how you live on. You don't live on forever by becoming Peter Pan, because he never existed. It's a story. You don't do that. You live on through your children. And when I see Muslims in this country, and I see how many kids they're having, they understand this. Every other ethnic group in the country understands this. We're the only ones who don't, because this propaganda is aimed. Yeah, it does affect some people. It probably does affect other ethnic groups to some degree, but it affects us the most. It's laser focused on the white man. And that's why we're screwed. It's why our women are screwed. It's why some of our men are screwed. It's why, I meet young men who say, I don't want to be a dad. What, would I be able to pay, 5 hours of Call of Duty every night if I was a dad? No, but you shouldn't want to be playing 5 hours of Call of Duty when you hit your 30s. Put that behind you, mate. Look, there's nothing wrong with having fun. But having fun at the expense of having children is you being fooled, and you're missing out on the most important aspect of your life.
Yeah. No, exactly. Family and legacy, I think the more wiser you get, these are the things you should always strive for. And the fact that all of your ancestors obviously have done this should be something to kind of pay attention to. I guess we've got still a little bit of time, but I know this is something which a lot of people want to know is, like, what do you think? I know you spend a lot of time building community. You have patriotic alternative and, all these bits. What do you think, for the people who are awake, what do you think we should be doing right now outside of politics?
Look, the statistics are grim, and we've been through this today. 70-30, with a decreasing chance every year of taking real political power, and an increased chance every year that if we actually did take political power, it would be in some way subverted. Our birth rate in Britain as a whole is 1.4, which is catastrophically low. But that includes Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. Now, Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis have the highest birth rate. It drags ours up. The size of the average Pakistani family is 10 people, according to the last census. They have monstrous families. I would say the white birth rate in Britain, the white British birth rate, would be about 1.1. That is catastrophic on an unprecedented level. So what can we do? I don't think we should bank on anyone coming to save us via parliamentary means. I don't think we should bank on coming to power and turning things around. I think we should be aiming for the very real prospect that one day we'll be a minority, and we need to cluster. We need to buy houses on the same street as one another. We need to build intentional communities. I'm not talking about, running off somewhere and living in a commune or anything that would scare people. I'm talking about saying, well, we live on Smith Close. Would you like to buy a house on Smith Close? There's one up for grabs. Maybe we could pool some money and help young couples all move to Smith Close. And that little bit of land on the edge, that field, then we should buy that and put some, children's play equipment there and have barbecues there at the weekend. And, down from Smith Close, there's St. John's Place. Well, why don't we buy some houses there too? We need to start forming the same kind of intentional communities that Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, blacks do in the UK. And then we need to think about capturing local institutions in those areas and electing people from our own communities that we know will represent us properly in order to ensure those communities stay the way we want them. Britain is heading down the road of becoming a multi-ethnic sectarian society. And the only way to survive in that kind of society is by being a community that has a high degree of in-group preference. We can form those communities. And I'm not saying we should totally give up on parliamentary democracy. By all means, vote reform, vote restore. But don't bank on them coming to power. And if they do come to power, certainly don't bank on them bringing about the kind of world we want. Let's say, most likely case scenario would be reform coming to power. I don't think they'd give us exactly what we wanted. let's say best case scenario, reform folds, Rupert Lowe takes the reins and he gets to power and becomes prime minister. He would have, at first, at most, 5 years in power. Those first 5 years would be spent being at war with the civil service, with the police, with the NHS, with the courts, with the law lords, with magistrates, with local councils, with massive protests. There's 21 million people here who aren't white British. You know, people who think this can now be turned around by just voting somebody in, clicking your fingers, and it all just, you know, going back to the way it was in 1980 when we were 95% plus white British, that would be very, very naive. The establishment isn't stupid. They do intend to be in power forever, but they've also set up contingencies that if they aren't in power forever, that they have people in positions to ensure that anyone who took their power would be frustrated, held up, and blockaded at every opportunity. Labour tried to do a few migrant deportations at one point to try and win back white working class voters in red wall constituencies. You had people sat on the runways. You had cabin crews refusing to let the planes take off. This isn't that easy because we live in such a racially, ethnically, religiously, and even politically divided society. I wish there was a simple solution, but there isn't. So when you see the situation you're in, you have to plan for the worst. By all means, hope for the best. And I'll leave you with one last analogy. If you're on the Titanic and you're heading towards the iceberg and you know there's no way of avoiding that iceberg, you know you're going to hit the iceberg, what's the best course of action? Is it to help yourself at the all-you-can-eat buffet? Is it to get the buckets ready to start bailing the water out? Or is it to start preparing the lifeboats? And let's say you've hit the iceberg and water's pouring in. At some point, you've got to acknowledge that there aren't enough of you, there isn't enough buckets, and the water's coming in so fast that the ship is going to sink. At that point, would you be a fool to be standing knee deep in icy water with a bucket in your hand? Well, you would. You'd be best getting the lifeboats ready, preparing them, and if there isn't enough lifeboats, producing something that floats in the time that you've got left, or shackling lifeboats together so they can hold more people. There has to be some kind of lifeboat mechanism in place. Because like I said, I can't 100% say that we won't be saved by a parliamentary democracy, but with each passing year, it's more and more unlikely. And if we put all our chips, on that particular outcome, we could well be disappointed. We need to make sure there is a place for us if the worst comes to the worst. And we absolutely cannot be the people, like many whites are, stood at the all-you-can-eat buffet, filling their boots as the boat is rapidly going down. That's absolutely negligent. And all those people who are suffering from what I call Peter Pan syndrome, they are the people that as the Titanic was going down, they were at the all-you-can-eat buffet, enjoying one last game of billiards, on the dance floor, having that last waltz. We don't want to be those people. Now, the lifeboats aren't particularly attractive. They are a little bit splintery. They aren't comfy. They don't have cushioned seats, but they're a lot better than ice cold water. And if we all have to move to one area and we all have to make sacrifices, those sacrifices might be difficult in the short term, but it's a lot better to make them now than end up living in a future Birmingham or Newham or Croydon. Because it might be Croydon and Newham and Birmingham and Leicester and Luton today, but it's all already Manchester, and it may well be Leeds tomorrow. It may well be Nottingham a few years down the line, and you don't want to be in that position with a family. So my call to everyone is, I don't want to be the black-pilled guy, and I'm not. I do believe we can keep fighting, and I've been fighting for 25 years, so I'm a fighter, and I'm not about to give in. But we have to consider that there's a lot has happened over the last 20, 25 years in terms of demographic change and political and social change. And turning that round isn't an easy task. And it might result in us ultimately being a minority in our own country. So we have to plan for that today, when we've got time, when we can lay the groundwork, because planning for it tomorrow, when we're already in the water, when we're already freezing, when we're already flapping about, getting the lifeboats ready then isn't really an option.
Yeah, it's insanity. It's right. Yeah, I mean, I haven't given up with politics, but we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. And I've spoken to him a few times on the show. Eric Orwell, who's doing Return to the Land in the US. I've got a lot of respect for what he's doing. I think it is the right course of action. I don't see anything wrong with having a group of you. You know, we buy, just like I think we have the Woodlander, but I know he can't really talk about it at length because of all the discrimination laws, I assume. I haven't had a chance to speak to him. But I think having something like this in the background whilst we're all, you know, on the same page and who we vote for, I think that's essential.
And think of it like this. Actually, if we all moved to the same area, the parliamentary route would be a lot easier because we'd all vote for one of our own people. How do you think the Muslims have so much power? Well, they all move to the same area, and that's why there are entire... The Daily Mail at the moment is going into a meltdown because they reckon someone who is a convicted Muslim terrorist is going to be elected to a council in Britain. And they're saying that they've gone there and they've tried to speak to the people living there and say to them, but this guy's a convicted, and they don't care. He's one of theirs and they're going to vote for him no matter what. Why shouldn't we have areas like that? Why shouldn't we have towns and cities where we're like, look, we're all white British, we're proud to be, we're going to vote our own people in, and we're going to vote our own MP in, and we're going to look after ourselves. Every other group's done it. We need to start doing it. And I love Woodlander and what he's doing. I like buying patches of land that we can go and gather on. But it needs to be much bigger than that. It needs to be buildings. It needs to be homes that we can actually live in on the same streets. It needs to be community centres. It needs to be spaces where our kids can play. Eventually, it needs to be schools. We need to create a place for us before it's too late.
Yeah, Mark, thank you again for your time. This, really good. Really good. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And just one last call. Please do go and subscribe to me on Substack. Please do go and check out my Rumble and my Telegram. It means a lot to me. I'd like to thank you for having me on. I love having these chats. The first one was absolutely brilliant. I've really enjoyed today. I think we've covered a lot of new ground, and I hope everyone supports this man, what he's doing, his YouTube channel. And if you can become a member or help him out and keep him doing what he's doing, please do. It's a worthwhile investment.
Hello guys, this is important, so make sure you don't skip this. Firstly, if you found value, please remember to like, share and subscribe. But more importantly, often I hear on social media everyone highlighting what all of the issues are in society, but very little do I actually hear people giving solutions. And I don't like that. I don't like it when people can only show the bad and give people no utter hope for the future. If you've been watching this content and it has resonated with you, please make sure that you join the locals. This is where I'm building a real community with like-minded individuals, where we'll be doing live streams, Q&As, exclusive videos, and a chance for you guys to put your questions to some of the biggest people in this space. Because collectively we can actually have solutions, and collectively we can solve the problems which are going on in the West. I'll leave all the links down below. Make sure you leave your email too. I have a goal of getting 500 members before starting, and I'll be sure to keep everyone updated on the way. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next week. All the best.